So, ladies and gentlemen, 10 p.m. Bangkok time. Welcome to the Surrounded by Details podcast with me, Steve-O. I am and always will be your host. Let me turn down the music a little bit here. There we go. Welcome to the podcast. It has been a little while. My last episode was with Martin Negin, the championship weeks. First we talked to Martin Negin, the first ever two-division world champion in one championship. We are talking MMA, and then 2 days before that we had another world champion on the show called Menno van Gorp, aka B-Boy Menno, the man who won the Red Bull BC1 earlier this year, the World Finals in Amsterdam, and we are talking breakdance. And yeah, welcome back. It has been a little while. As I mentioned, I have been out and about. I've went to Phuket, I went to the Ironman, and then I went to Tiger Muay Thai. Shout out to all the guys that have been a always friendly host and helping me in my stay with everything I need. That is always appreciated when you travel. Before we start, as always, I would like to mention our always lovely support, the Dreamcatcher Hostel Bar and Cafe here in Bangkok. So if you decide to come to Bangkok, visit the lovely city of angels, then please... Oi, the music went on there. Then please make sure to make your booking with the One Championship, with the Dreamcatcher Hostel Bar and Cafe. It is a lovely place if you need a bed, or even if you just want to hang out, meet cool people, have a craft beer or delicious green curry, then this is the place to go. And talking about the Dreamcatcher, tomorrow we will be talking to Derek Uazwa, the founder and boss, the maestro behind the Dreamcatcher Hostel Bar and Cafe. But before we do so, it is an honor today to talk to this person that will be my guest for the next half an hour. We will see how this conversation goes. I've been talking about this and mentioning her name a couple of times. I've been mentioning her book, especially her book title, over and over again on the podcast, The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck. I'm talking about Sarah Knight, and she is an international best-selling author from the New York Times who decided to not give a fuck and move from the States to the Dominican Republic. I came across her TED Talk earlier this year, and ever since I have been hooked. I have been reading and I have been doing research and also a little soul thinking. And sometimes you have to realize there are things that you cannot control. And funny wise, the last couple of days I have been finding myself in such a situation, and remembering her book and her TED Talk helped me a little bit to go through these difficult times. They're not really difficult, but yeah, certain things you have to deal with in life, no matter if you want or not. So, as I said, I'm very stoked, and I shall go to the Skype machine and see if I can reach Sarah Knight. I know she is ready and waiting for this call. We have been waiting for this podcast basically almost 6 months. 6 months ago, I got in touch with her, and she was writing on her third book and asked me to come back later to her during the end of October, November. And so I did. And surprisingly, because I can imagine she's very busy with writing and then promoting her book and the TED Talk, and I'm sure there's a lot of requests going in. I'm very, very honored to say that she immediately replied to me once again and set this date of November 29th, which is today, 10 p.m. Bangkok time, which is or was 4 minutes ago. So let's not waste any further time. Let's just go to the Skype machine and call Sarah and see what she is up to.
Hello?
Hello, Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
How are
Can you hear
you?
me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, very good. I'm fine, thank you.
How is life treating you in the Dominican Republic this early morning?
Well, the sun is shining, which is really all I ever want. So I'd say it's treating me pretty well.
That sounds nice. Sun is something that I would like to have here in Bangkok and Thailand as well. But we are still having gray clouds and a little bit of rain. So we are still waiting for the high season.
Well, I'll send you good vibes.
I receive them gladly. Sarah, I've just mentioned in my intro, I'm very honored to have you on the show. I have been waiting to talk to you for about 6 months now. Ever since I saw your TED Talk, I have been hooked with your book and your TED Talk in general, The Magic of How Not Giving a Fuck. How has life been for you ever since the TED Talk?
Well, first of all, I'm really flattered that you liked the talk so much, and thank you for reaching out. I think that when you first asked me to be on the show, I was writing my new book, and I was completely booked up with that. So I'm glad that we managed to do this. The TED Talk was really phenomenally received. I could not have hoped for, a better result from that. And it was something that I had spent about 10 months preparing for. So to do that for 10 months and then spend about 12 minutes speaking to 1,000 people and have it go on video, and then suddenly, work its way around the world, almost 3 million views at this point, was really spectacular and an amazing experience.
How was it for you to get the message from TED Talk, or did you reach out to them? Because I can imagine it's quite a difference between writing a book and then actually standing in front of so many people and also having a huge audience on YouTube, as you mentioned.
Yes, they reached out to me, which I was really grateful for. And, somebody on their committee had read my first book and, shared it with everybody else. And they wanted me to give a talk. So, I said yes, even though I was a little bit nervous about it. I figured, well, I have 10 months to prepare. So,
yeah, that should be enough time.
Yeah, so that's how it started.
Yeah, but I, as you might know or might not know, depending on if you have listened to a few episodes before, for me, when I have guests, it's always a little bit more about the story, how we ended up recording this podcast. By now, I've said this as well in the beginning. My audience knows because I've been talking about your book a couple of times in different episodes, and I just like to say the magic of not giving a fuck. It goes so smooth from the tongue, and it replies to so many moments in life. But you have not always been an author. How did you get involved in writing? Where does your passion for writing come from?
Well, I've always been a big reader, and when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer, although I didn't really know what that meant at the time. And, I graduated from college with a degree in English literature, and then I moved to New York City, and I started working in book publishing. And, that was really the formal introduction to the world of writers and writing. And I was a book editor for 15 years in New York City at the biggest publishers in the world. And then I realized that I didn't want to work for a corporation anymore. I didn't want to have to commute so long to get to an office every day to practice diplomacy and to follow rules that I didn't necessarily agree with. So I made a really big decision about 2.5 years ago to, pull the ripcord on that career and work for myself. And so I was going to become a freelance editor, and I did that for a few months, but I actually had the idea for my first book, The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck. And when I sold that book to a publisher, I sort of became a full-time writer accidentally, and now I'm on my third book. So that's sort of the story in a nutshell.
What I always wonder is when you make this decision of becoming a freelancer and leaving a secure job, it sounds like a difficult decision, but it is really not, because people should follow the path that they want to take. And all it takes is literally of not giving a fuck what other people think and just do it. How much wind did you have against you from other people around you? I can imagine when you have such a secure job and decide to make a big change, there are always people that will say, hey, are you really sure about this? You're doing fine right now. What do you think are you going to get out of this? What feedback did you receive from people around you or in general on social media?
Well, I didn't tell anybody what I was planning to do, except my husband, of course, because I didn't want to get involved in those kinds of conversations. I didn't want people to second guess me. I didn't want to add any more noise to my own head, because it wasn't an easy decision for me. It was actually a decision that was born ultimately out of desperation, because I was just so unhappy with my current situation that I had to make a change. But I was very nervous about not only going into the unknown world of working for myself without really a safety net, but also because my career and my sort of ambition had defined me for so long as a person that it was difficult to imagine what what my life would be like if I couldn't say, oh, I'm a senior editor at one of the biggest publishing companies in the world. You know, it was a really big change. So as I said, I made the decision, but I didn't really tell anybody that I was planning on doing it because I really didn't want to be talked out of it. So that's a tip that I give in the book, which is what other people don't know, you don't have to talk about at brunch.
That is true. And I always like when people say, I felt unhappy. But where was the moment where you really feel unhappy? Because a lot of people might reflect on themselves, but they miss the point where they realize, wait a second, this is not really what I want to do. So where was the point for you? Can you recall? Can you remember?
Well, it was a long period of time of being mildly unhappy and experiencing panic attacks at the office and things like that. And finally, I made a lot of little changes and none of them were really working. And so I just sort of had the epiphany one day that the problem was my job and that the only way to change it was to leave it. So, in that sense, it was an easy calculation. It was a very simple kind of binary situation. If I stay in this job, I will continue to be unhappy. If I leave this job, I might have a chance to be happier. So it was sort of a long period of, some depression and a lot of anxiety that culminated in a day where I said, okay, I can't do it this way anymore. I have to try something different.
So you consider yourself more as a logic person?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. With the book title and being a logic person, I might have to ask the question, do you have some German roots in your family?
Not that I know of. We seem to be fine Anglo-Saxon stock from England. So
yeah, I'm German. I'm a very logic person. I love the game of chess. I love to know that there is a consequence to every action you take. And some people always make fun of me because I'm German, and that seems to be a typical German thing. When you wrote your first book and you came up with the idea of not giving a fuck. Now, when you write a book, for me, when I write or when I talk, I often have my head ahead of my tongue, if that makes any sense. How did you settle with the idea of this is the message I want to bring to the people, and how many times or how long did you actually work on your first book?
Well, probably your listeners are familiar with Marie Kondo's Japanese tidying guide, which became a big global bestseller, translated into many languages, and it's called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up.
Yeah.
And I had read that book right when I quit my job. It was one of the books that I wanted to have time to read, but because I was spending all of my time editing other people's work, I just didn't have a lot of time for pleasure reading. So I picked it up and I read it, and I was very interested in it. And I think that she has a lot of great ideas about tidying your physical space. But it kind of made me realize that tidying your mental space might be an even greater, sort of change for a lot of people, including me. And I had just gone through this period where I had decided that I no longer gave a fuck about my career. And then I had stopped giving my fucks to it, which in the parlance of my book, is your time, energy, and money. Those are your fuck bucks.
Yeah.
So as I was reading Marie Kondo's book and I was thinking about my own life experience, I thought, what would be a really sort of funny take on decluttering would be to, do a parody of this book. And so that's how The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck started. But it turned into, as I was writing it, and certainly after it was published in 20 countries, it turned into sort of a phenomenon of its own in a very different way. So it was kind of an interesting evolution. And in answer to the second part of your question, I wrote it in 1 month.
In 1 month?
Yes, it was a very, very short deadline. I don't recommend it.
Well, but did you work? You got me off hook here with 1 month. That really surprised me. I thought this book took you maybe half a year, and you took your time. But 1 month is a very, very fast time to write a book. Was that because of the deadline, or just because you wanted to get it out of the way?
It was because of the deadline. I mean, I worked in publishing myself, so I understood why my publisher, Little Brown in the United States and Quercus in the UK, wanted to get the book out as quickly as possible, and they wanted to have it out in time for, the typical sort of self-help January titles. And, by the time I had the idea, written the proposal, revised the proposal with my agent, sent it out, gotten the offers from the publishers and settled on a deal, there were only 4 weeks left to write the book in order to get it out in time. So
that is crazy. From not being happy to straight into a deadline. That is a little bit insane in my opinion, in a positive way. But did you commit?
It is, but
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was a little bit insane, but it was a big difference because the deadline was in service to my own, wants and needs instead of in service to my company's wants and needs. So it was definitely a positive change of pace.
Yeah. Did you immediately admit trilogy, or was that something that came afterwards? Because the sequel book was called Get Your Shit Together, which is another great title. Or was it after the first book slowly started to, find its audience and you decided, okay, I'm going to make a sequel out of this?
It was a little bit of both. I felt like I had more to say, but I wasn't exactly sure. Again, as a former book editor, I'm aware that if the first book doesn't take off, then there might not be a market for the sequel. Yeah. So, I had the idea for Get Your Shit Together in mind, and it turned out that the first book was doing really well and that people were interested in more from me. So I put that together a little bit sooner in the year, in 2016, than I had done the previous book, which meant that I had 2 months to write it. So that was,
that's not much more, but at least that's better than nothing. 2 months is a little bit double the amount of time that you had for the first one. I have to ask you a question because when I was setting up the live stream here on YouTube, where we do live stream, I had some problems with typing in the word fuck. How much difficulties did you have with this title? Because the word fuck and not giving a shit, it's very rough, it's very raw. Did people recommend to you to be more polite in your title? And did you think, no, I'm going to call it like this because it has to be straightforward so people know what they are reading and what they're listening to?
Well, it's an excellent question because it has been very divided. It seems like a lot of readers love the titles. It's what attracts them to the books. They always say, oh, as soon as I saw that language, I knew this was going to be something I would like. But the retailers don't want to, display words like that. And of course, you need the retailers to take your books in order for the customers to find them and buy them. Yeah. So there was a real delicate balance with my global publishers as to, how to represent the words. Do we use an asterisk? Can we write the words out inside the book without the asterisk? And then, of course, in all of the advertising for the books. And I had, similar conversations with the people at TEDx when I did the TEDx talk. And it seemed like everybody I was working with was really open to the language. They understood that it was humorous. They understood that I wasn't being, coarse just for the sake of it, or for the hell of it, I should say. But it was a delicate dance with, radio and television and speaking engagements and things like that, because a lot of people, still can't quite get their heads around using those words so publicly. So. Yeah,
I totally understand. But I have to ask you the question, and I don't want to get too deep into the subject, but political correctness, is that something that you say it's too much? People should talk more forward? Is that the way you talk in general? I mean, when you have a conversation with somebody, do you say shit or do you rather say, I don't really like it?
Oh, I use those words for sure. I don't use them 742 times in one conversation like I did in the book, but that was as much for the parody aspect as it was for just writing in my own voice. But I do think it's important for people to speak authentically, and that can mean that you are an authentically, politically correct, demure person, or it can mean that you are authentically, swearing like a sailor. I don't think that anybody should change who they are and how they speak based on what they think other people will think about it, which is sort of one of the main tenets of my book.
Yeah, there's a great saying, I'm only responsible for what I say, not for how you receive it. But yet words can be used so different. And I always take the word fuck as an example, because you can say fuck you, or you can say I fucking love you. It has a complete different meaning. So it's always very interesting to have a proper conversation with actually seeing somebody. I think when you type messages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you type them, there's a lot of stuff that gets lost along the way. But everything takes time, and I think we get there as well. As you mentioned earlier, your book has, despite the title, been a success all over the world, basically, and including the US, Canada, England, Germany, of course, because we are straightforward. We love titles like that. Italy and Poland. Have you ever been traveling with your book in these countries, or how do you deal with the feedback that you get from all these different countries?
I haven't traveled beyond Canada and the UK for specific book readings and signings yet, though I have been invited to several of those countries and am trying to work out something for next summer to do, a few visits to various countries in Europe where the books are published. I hear from a lot of people because social media connects everybody so thoroughly. And I hear from people all over the world about all of the books, and it's really 99% positive. Every once in a while I get kind of a nasty tweet from somebody who says that I'm a terrible writer and that I shouldn't have a book deal, and I just, I just delete it. I don't really care. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah. I have to watch out that this episode can actually launch. With the amount of swear words we have on air today, might be a little bit difficult, but I don't care. But yeah, you can't really pay attention to the people who write you bad things, because out of 100 people, there will always be 1 or 2 people who have nothing better to do. And yes, I'm talking about you, dear keyboard warriors, than hating on other people. And I always recommend just scroll past them. It's the same for me with podcasting. But once you start giving a fuck about these people, it becomes difficult because you obtain a lot of your energy. And this is something that is my favorite part in your book and in your TED Talk, the fuck budget. Can you tell my audience a little bit about what exactly is a fuck budget?
Sure. So in the book, if I say I don't give a fuck about something, I mean I don't care about something. And I also mean that I'm not giving my fucks to that thing. So my fucks are my time, energy, and money. Yeah. So what I say is, just like you would balance, your checking account, and you would keep an eye on how much money you have, you can budget your fucks. And you can say, I only have so much time, so much energy, and so much money to give, so I need to spend it on the things that bring me joy. And conversely, not spend it on the things that annoy me. So the fuck budget is really a way to very clearly and easily separate the things that annoy you from the things that make you happy, and then spend your fuck bucks on the things that make you happy.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to make decisions that don't really make you happy. How do you deal with that? Because sometimes there is a reason for the purpose.
Yes, and this is true, and it's actually something that I deal with even more in my second book, Get Your Shit Together.
I haven't gotten to that one yet.
That book is all about setting goals and achieving them, and taking all of the sort of fuck bucks that you have left after you've discarded the things that you don't want to spend your time, energy, and money on, and making the most efficient use of them. And that includes having to give some of those fucks to things that you don't really want to do. Not everybody can just quit their job. I happened to spend a year saving up money so that I would be able to quit my job. But it's the kind of thing where maybe your job annoys you, but you can't necessarily cross it off of your fuck budget just yet. So I do give a lot of advice in both of the books about how to make the best out of a situation that is maybe not, ideal. And what it really comes down to is, give your fucks to things you can control, like your own behavior, and don't give them to things you can't control, like other people's opinions. So behave in a way that makes you a good person, and don't worry about what anybody else thinks of it. And this is, the second sort of tenet of the book, is to not give a fuck with honesty and politeness so that you don't become an asshole. Because my books are not about becoming somebody who cares about nothing and doesn't care about other people's feelings. They're really about just focusing on what makes you happy and then going after it, in a way that doesn't hurt anybody else.
Why do you think so many people give a fuck about what other people think? That is always a question that hits me, because for my story, real shortly, my audience knows this by now. I quit school when I was 17. I knew basically quite early that I wanted to be a photographer, and then I'm German, but I grew up in Sweden, and decided to leave Sweden out of several reasons, and started my photography career in Germany. And at some point, I came to the exact same point that you mentioned, where you realized I'm not really happy. And then it happened to be that I got a job in Korea, and I told my dad I'm gonna do a 2-week vacation in Thailand after that. And after 4.5 years, I'm still here. And I never really cared about what other people think. I might have done that when I was a little bit younger, but as older I grow, as more I realize that, of course, you should pay attention to what other people think and say, but you have to realize that not every feedback is valuable feedback. But for a lot of people, as you said, they have problems of not just be able to leave their job or the life they live at the moment. Why is it so important to these people of, caring about what other people think?
I mean, I think that probably a psychologist would be better able to answer that question, with evidence behind it. But I think it's something that's just been certainly ingrained in me since I was a young child, and it took a long time. I'm almost 39 now, and it took a very long time to separate, something that was sort of taught when I was very young from the reality of my life now. And I talk about that a lot in my new book, which is called You Do You. And it's all about, being the person you want to be and who you really are, and not changing yourself for other people. And, I talk about how there are a lot of rules that we learn as children, and some of them are, don't be mean, because that's a bad thing to be a mean person. And, as you become an adult, you realize it's actually okay to tell somebody, to get angry at somebody if they deserve it, and to do it in a way that is productive and that gets you to the result that you need to get, even if you have to be a little mean about it. So I talk a lot in that book about the shift from, being a kid and absorbing all of these kind of what I call the social contract, these sort of cultural rules and obligations and expectations that we're set up with in order to be, good humans, in order to not be psychopaths. Yeah. And then by the time you're an adult, you start to realize, as I did, that some of those things are not as immutable as they might have seemed, and that it's actually okay for you to take your own approach. And, I certainly wish that I had stopped giving a fuck about what other people think when I was, 15 instead of 35. But here I am, and hopefully I'm helping other people figure it out sooner than I did. Yeah.
Your third book, by the way, for the people who are interested, You Do You, How to Be... English. Hashtag not a native English speaker. You do you, how to be who you are and use what you've got to get what you want. And it's quite funny because I went to Phuket, which is in the south of Thailand, over the weekend. I was there for the Ironman, and then I met some other friends, and I stayed in a hostel, and there were 2 young backpackers, 19 and 21, and we had a couple of beers, and we started to have a deep conversation about life and the universe. You know how it is when you have a couple of beers. And we were talking about how you would like to go through life, and they mentioned you want to help everybody, you will always want to be polite, and I was trying to tell them the very same thing, that there will be points in your life where you realize that you have to look at yourself. And I want to make clear, I totally agree with you that when you are or having this selfish perspective, that it's not necessary because you are a selfish person, it is because you have to look at yourself at the end of the day. And where did this switch take place for you? I mean, was it 20, 25, 30? For me, I made a huge step from 27 and 30, where I realized that I really have to start looking at myself, even though I have to consider facts from the outside. The main point at the end of the day is always myself.
I think that it started probably in my late 20s when I was getting married, and I was moving, ahead in my career, and it was just, under a lot of pressure in my personal life and in my professional life. and I started to crack a little bit, and that was when I started realizing that I had to take better care of myself, mentally and physically, in order to not completely go off the deep end. Now, unfortunately, I allowed the pressure to get to me for another 5 years or so, and I did go off the deep end. And then, and that's when, as I said to you earlier, I finally realized, okay, enough is enough. I need to make a big change. But I talk a lot in all of my books about selfishness and how I really am trying to destigmatize the word selfish, because there's a really big gray area between good selfish and bad selfish. And the example that I use in The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck is that you have to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. And, that's just an easy way to remember that you're no good to anybody else if you've already depleted everything that you have left. If you're passed out from oxygen deprivation, you can't help anyone. So, so that metaphor kind of continues in a message throughout the 3 books. And then in You Do You, I actually devote an entire chapter to being selfish, and talking about the difference between, good selfish and bad selfish, and also the dangers of being totally selfless, which I actually think can really set you up for a fall. So.
Yeah, my grandma is like this. She thinks about everybody else, and she is at the very last spot. Good heart, but it doesn't really always work. You know what I mean? There's a lot of problems that come up along the way. You mentioned before the word adult. And that is something that interests me to know. When do you consider yourself an adult? Because you say, when I became an adult, I realized more this and more that. When do you consider, is a human being actually adult? Because I always think that we always are a kid in our mind. We don't really know what's going on. And once we realize that everybody is living the same day for the very first time, that's when you realize that nobody really has an idea what's going on. So when are you adult and when are you still a kid?
I would say that for me, the distinction is when I started taking care of myself. When I moved out of my parents' home, even in college, I certainly had a lot of support system. But then when I moved to New York City, I was really taking care of myself, and I was realizing more and more what was, as I said earlier, the sort of non-negotiable rules of being a human in the world and the rules that could maybe be bent or broken. So that's where I would draw the distinction, because it's when you have to start making all of your own decisions, you maybe start to exert your own personality and your own wants and needs onto those decisions, instead of just the things that you were taught and that you were meant to follow when you were living under someone else's roof. Yeah. So, I certainly think it's different for everybody, but that's when I would kind of draw that distinction for myself.
Now, our listeners know by now that you have been writing a book, that you have been a publisher and a writer and decided to go into freelancing. But what maybe not everybody knows is that you then decided to be a freelancer is not enough. I want to leave everything behind me. I want to go into the sun. And you decided to leave New York City, which is a city for many people around the world, the place to be, and then move to the Dominican Republic, which I had to find out once we started to write emails, because I thought you live in New York as well. What was the main reason why to leave New York? Because it is a great city, especially for an artist or for a writer, because there's a lot of publishers around or galleries and agencies. Why leave New York?
Well, my husband and I both really wanted to live somewhere warm. And, that might sound like a silly reason to pack up your entire life, but it was really important to us. We did not want to live in the cold, winters of the Northeast anymore. And frankly, the cold spring and fall as well. And when I decided that I was okay with leaving my career behind, which was a very New York-centric career, we thought, well, this might be a good time to consider moving out of the city. So it all kind of happened, the dominoes sort of fell as a result of one another, and we did a lot of research, and we found, a country that we really liked, and we found a town we really liked, and we found a house that we really liked. And so, it was just a series of small decisions that wound up in one really big life change.
But never did you have any fears of what if this doesn't work out? It's easier for me to get into a steady job when I live in New York instead of the Dominican Republic.
Oh, I definitely had those fears, but I would say that it was a question of the potential for being happier outweighing the worry about things that hadn't happened yet. So it's something that I've been working on a lot in my life, which is to not worry about things that I can't control, to not give a fuck about things that I can't control, and also to not worry about things that haven't happened yet. So I am a very logical person, and I do sort of plan my life like a chess game in many respects, but there are some things that I've realized I can't give too much psychological weight to, because if I did, then I would never do anything. I would never make any changes. True. And, that's just kind of not really productive.
Now I do have to ask, do you play chess?
I do not play chess. A college boyfriend tried to teach me how, and I was very impatient, and I never learned.
That's interesting. A very impatient person. You seem to me like you are a very patient person and know what you want. I would not think that you are an impatient person. That is very surprising. But
it may have been the relationship.
Yeah, I have to ask another question, because it's very interesting. You write and all these kind of things, and on my podcast I have a lot of people who travel around the world with what they do. I have dancers on, I have MMA fighters on, and a bunch of other people. When you arrived in the Dominican Republic and you have been living in the States for so long, what were the main differences from the new place compared to the old place?
Besides the weather.
Besides of the weather, of course, yeah.
The Dominican Republic is like many Caribbean places that I've visited, just very slow paced, and New York City is very, very, very fast paced. So the biggest difference is, just the feeling of calm and that nobody is in a rush to do anything or get anywhere. And that was actually really good for me. It was frustrating in the beginning because my husband and I had both been trained as New Yorkers to, and as Americans, I think, to do things, very quickly and efficiently, and, to not delay. And here, it's just a much more sort of calm, easygoing, maybe it'll happen today, maybe it'll happen tomorrow kind of attitude. And I think that actually was good for me because it helped me just as a person calm down a little bit.
Yeah. In Thailand, we call that sabai sabai, relax, relax. It's the very same attitude here. If your house is on fire, you call the fire department. We will come as soon as possible. If it doesn't work tonight, we will definitely come tomorrow. And in case we get stuck in traffic jam, then we come the day after tomorrow. Do you still visit the States from time to time, or you like me? Because I have a very bad conscience. I need to visit my parents. I haven't been home for 4 years. And my mom puts a big pressure on me, so I need to go home at some point, and maybe this Christmas, who knows. But how regular do you still go back to the States?
We've been going back, a few times a year, sort of depending. Sometimes it's to visit our friends. Sometimes it's to visit our family. Sometimes I have work. I do speaking engagements and things like that require travel. So we've spent a decent amount of time, traveling. But frankly, I'm always happy to be home. I don't really want to be away from this new home for very long because I like it so much.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. But what do you tell these people who come to you and say, Sarah, man, I admire you for what you did, the courage you had to move to another place, especially as a freelancer? Because my parents received that question a lot. They had a camping place in the middle of the forest in Sweden, and there were many tourists from all over the world. And they always ask my parents, what did you make? What did you make to actually move? And my parents always answered, there's always 99 reasons to say no and only one reason to say yes. What do you tell people who ask you, Sarah, how did you accomplish what you accomplished? And sorry for the language, but where did you grow the balls?
Well, that's really what the second book, Get Your Shit Together, is all about. And what I say is that any big change is just a series of smaller, more manageable changes. So really what happened is, you make the decision to do the big thing, and then you divide it up into a lot of little things, and then you just tackle them one at a time so that it doesn't require nearly as many balls to do it.
And oh, now you got me on the spot here because I had a question, but I lost it in my mind. Sometimes as I said before, your head is faster than your mouth. But people always come with the argument that, yeah, I have this and I have this and I have this to deal with. You need to make a decision at some point. I mean, where's the point where you really say, stop it, stop talking, and go and do it?
Again, I think it's really just, for me, it was a matter of desperation. You know, I had to make a change, so I did.
Yeah, never change anything that is working. Maybe you need to come to that point of desperation to realize that some changes are required. And to slowly bring this to an end, you mentioned that you are currently writing or finished your third book. And what appointments do you have for your book? Can we expect another TED Talk from you? Can we expect a fourth book from you? What are your plans with the third book and after that?
Well, I'm doing a lot of the publicity right now for the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom, as well as Australia and New Zealand. And then we have publication deals for other countries. So, you know, it's really going to be a long process of doing interviews like this and talking about the ideas of You Do You while I come up with something new, which I'm not really sure exactly what it's going to be yet, but I do have some ideas that I'm rolling around in my head.
But do you see yourself doing another TED Talk because you received so many good feedbacks from the first one?
I've been invited to do a couple more, actually, and I've declined because it was a lot of work and it turned out really good. So part of me doesn't want to mess with success.
Yeah, never change anything that is working.
Yeah, but also, you know, it really does take a lot of effort to plan the talk and to write and revise it and to put together all of the slides and to rehearse it. And I've been very busy writing you know, my subsequent books, so I haven't really had the time and energy to put toward that, but I won't rule it out for sure.
Yeah. Have you ever heard about the name Rich Franklin?
No, that doesn't ring a bell.
Rich Franklin is a former UFC fighter. We talk cage fighting, and he has a TED Talk. I work with him here in Asia a lot because he works for a promotion called One Championship. And he has a TED Talk called How to Be a Loser. And it basically is about how to come to the lowest point, aka desperation, to change things. And this conversation reminds me a lot of what he has been saying. And it reminds me of that so many people have the same view on things, but yet the different ways can be way more complicated than they actually need to be, if that makes any sense.
Oh, well, that sounds like something I definitely have to check out as soon as we get off the phone.
Yeah, he was on the TED Talk, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. Now he's based in Singapore, a really interesting character. And that's all I can recommend for a TED Talk. My list is getting longer and longer, books I need to read. I saw another book on my way from Phuket back to Bangkok called Sapiens. It's a brief history about the humankinds. But once you start with the first book, you kind of need to finish the trilogy. So that's what I'm going to do. Go to Amazon, get your shit together, and then, of course, You Do You, how to be who you are and use what you've got to get what you want. That is a very complicated title for somebody who is not a native English speaker.
Well, you've acquitted yourself admirably.
Where can we find information about you? Where can we buy your book? And where can we follow Sarah Knight in case we are interested in seeing how all this develops and what more is about to come?
Well, everything about all of my books is on my website, which is sarahknightauthor.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Medium at MC Snugs, which is MCSNUGZ. And I post about my books, and I post about my life, and I post about the news. So there's a lot of writing of mine on Medium and a lot of great pictures of the Dominican Republic on Instagram. And as I said, a lot of news about the books and where to find them on Twitter. Yeah.
How does that Twitter name work for you, by the way? Because it took me a long time to realize that I might make it as simple as possible. Just change my Twitter name to steve.bonhage instead of something small and complicated.
Well, it started out as an inside joke, and I think I've developed a nice little following, and I don't really want to change it, although it has been suggested to me that I would be easier to find if I were under my own name, but I like MC Snugs.
Yeah, and once again, it's something that not necessarily requires a fuck to give about. Sarah, I thank you once again so much for coming on the podcast, for making the time. It took us 6 months, and I'm very happy that I had the chance to talk to you in person, and I can't wait to start your second book and then the third one, and by the time I'm finished with the third one, probably the fourth one.
Well, I really appreciate you chasing me for so long, and it was a fun conversation. I hope your listeners enjoyed it. And maybe we'll speak again.
I hope so. I very much hope so. Sarah Knight, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. There she is, and of course, all the information, Twitter accounts and website, everything will be below in the description of the live stream link and wherever else we publish this podcast on iTunes, Podbean, SoundCloud, and so on. Sarah Knight, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Boom! There we go, Sarah Knight, ladies and gentlemen. What a interesting character and a even more interesting book to read. I can only recommend the very first book that she wrote, The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck. I can't wait to start the second book. And I know for a fact, a friend of mine, and you know him from the podcast actually, Emilio Urrutia, Tiger Muay Thai One Championship fighter, he was asking me if I am back in Bangkok already, because I met him when I was down in Phuket. And then I mentioned to him that I will answer him later because I will have a podcast with Sarah Knight, a New York Times international best-selling author. And he said, "What? I just got recommended that book." It seems like this book title is getting around more and more because there is, of course, truth in what she is writing. And then, of course, the title itself makes it sound very interesting to read this book. Yeah, that was pretty much it for today, ladies and gentlemen. A short but very informative and interesting podcast episode. As always, I would like to ask you to let me know what you think about the show, because otherwise, if we don't know what you think, we cannot adjust and we cannot develop as a show. So your feedback is important. Give us a like, give us a dislike, or just let us know your thought in the comment section. That's all I care about. I want to know your opinion, and maybe also if you have any questions to me or my guests, let me know them as well. You can forward them, of course, to sbd@stevebonhage.com, STEVBONHAGE. And yes, that is Steve without a E at the end, because my parents grew up in East Germany and they simply don't speak English and forgot the E at the end of Steve. If, once again, you want to follow Sarah Knight, we will put all the information below in the description here on YouTube. So if you're listening on iTunes, Podbean, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Overcast, and all the other platforms where we publish this podcast, then please make sure to go down below in the description and click on the links. Each one support one. And yeah, if you want to follow me personally, then you can check out Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. Steve.Bonhage, once again, STEV.BONHAGE. If you look for the podcast, all you have to do is to Google the Surrounded by Details podcast, the fastest growing podcast in or out of the Asian region, where we talk to travelers, freelance artists, from dancers to photographers to writers to all kinds of people you can imagine. And it doesn't really matter where they are, because we have the magic of Skype and WhatsApp. And if you remember, you can also make normal phone calls over the phone. You don't necessarily need all these apps. I wonder sometimes, do people actually still make phone calls, or is everything done via WhatsApp or Skype nowadays? However, if you're not a social media person, if you don't really like to get into Facebook and Twitter and all this kind of stuff, just check out my website, www.stevebonhage.com, where you can find all the finest photography in Asia, maybe the world, maybe even the universe. Who knows? Only you can judge me. I like to say that. It always sounds funny to me. Might not sound funny to you because of my German dialect and my German flatness of speech, because in Germany we all say everything in one tone, and that makes it maybe difficult to understand our sarcasm sometimes, even though Germans have great humor, despite the fact that a lot of people always say Germans don't have humor. That is a lie, a complete lie, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening to the Surrounded by Details podcast. If you want to support us, by the way, we do have t-shirts available on our website as well, and these t-shirts are not just t-shirts with a simple logo on. These t-shirts include prints from my photography, and you go ahead and visit the shop at www.stevebonhage.com/SBD shop. Have a look at all the shirts. I am still updating my website, and I am still uploading new designs every week until I run out of pictures. But that could take a very long time because I love what I do and I've been taking pictures for a very long time. However, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you for listening. My name is Stevo and you have been listening to this Surrounded by Details podcast. Be awesome, stay awesome, and always be awesome.